Hi, welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. Now, whether you're building a budget gaming PC with a Ryzen 5600 or a 4K ultra gaming PC with a Ryzen 7800X 3D, getting the best motherboard, it can be really confusing. So we'll cover everything that you need to know to get the best motherboard for Ryzen 5000 and the best motherboard for Ryzen 7000 series CPUs, and we'll give you specific product recommendations for every budget level. Remember, if you get value out of this video, please give it a like, so it makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe, click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. With that, let's jump into it. Before that, this video is sponsored by VIP SCD Key. Say goodbye to crazy expensive Windows 10 licenses and that terrible Activate Windows 10 watermark. Right now, use the links in the video description, head over to VIP SCD Key, and get a Windows 10 Home or Pro OEM license for a great price. Pick your product license, then use the PC Builder discount code PC25 for an additional 25% off. Go to the activation settings on your PC, put in the code, and boom! You have a fully licensed Windows 10 for a crazy low price, which can be upgraded for free to Windows 11. Use the links in the video description below. Let's quickly review which CPUs we'll focus on in this video. Given the current state of the market, Ryzen 5000 CPUs remain great value options for budget gaming builds. In particular, the Ryzen 5500, the Ryzen 5600, or the Ryzen 5600X. The Ryzen 5700X and 5800X 3D, those are good options for drop-in upgrades if you already own an AM4 motherboard. But if you are doing a new PC build with one of them, then any of the motherboards that we suggest for the Ryzen 5600 will also work fine. For Ryzen 7000 series CPUs, like the Ryzen 7600, 7600X, as well as the Ryzen 7700 and 7700X, they all make great mid-range to higher-end gaming CPUs, with the Ryzen 7800X 3D the top gaming CPU right now. The great news is that for those of you buying a higher core count Ryzen CPU, like the 7900X or 7950X, any of the motherboards that we're going to recommend for Ryzen 7000 will also work just fine. For more on which CPU to pair with your GPU, see our best CPU and GPU combo video. Let's talk about motherboard chipsets, because oh my goodness, can they be confusing. From B450 to B550 to B650 to X670 to A620 and beyond. The first thing to focus on is the first number that comes after the letter. So for instance, focus on the 6 in the B650, as that tells you the generation of motherboard, often called the series. Chipsets in the 400 and 500 series, so B450 and B550 motherboards for instance, are all on the AM4 socket, which supports Ryzen 5000 and earlier CPUs, which have the pins on the CPU itself. Note that the 500 series boards support PCIe Gen 4 speed, while the 400 series is on PCIe Gen 3. More on that later in our motherboard recommendations. Chipsets in the 600 series, like the B650 and X670 motherboards, are on the AM5 socket with the pins on the motherboard, and they support Ryzen 7000 CPUs. So if you have a Ryzen 7000 CPU, you'll need a 600 series board, and for Ryzen 5000 CPUs, we recommend a 500 series board, though for ultra budget builds, you can probably get away with a 400 series motherboard. Now let's talk about the letter in the chipset name. 99% of you will want to get a B series motherboard like a B550 or B650, depending on your CPU. The A series boards, they're super cut down versions that don't usually allow the use of Precision Boost Overdrive. That's AMD's set it and forget it auto overclocking feature that we do recommend that you use. But they also cost about the same as the B series motherboards, so there's really no reason to consider them. X570 motherboards for Ryzen 5000 are very overpriced, and they don't offer any useful features over B550. X670 chipset motherboards for Ryzen 7000 CPUs include really expensive and totally useless features like support for PCIe Gen 5 graphics cards and SSDs, even though there are no PCIe Gen 5 graphics cards and likely won't be for quite a while. Not to mention that PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, they're very expensive and they offer no tangible benefits to 99.9% of consumers over more affordable PCIe Gen 3 or Gen 4 SSDs. See our best SSD for gaming video for more on that. So that leaves the B series motherboards, which we strongly recommend for all but the most professional workstation users who need tons of extra storage and features. And for them, we will include X670 recommendations as well. So here it is. If you have a Ryzen 5500 CPU, you want to get either a B450 or B550 motherboard. If you have any of the Ryzen 5600, 5600X, or higher core count Ryzen 5000 CPUs, then you want a B550 motherboard. If you have a Ryzen 7000 CPU, 99% of you want a B650 motherboard, and for the handful of professional workstation super users, we'll recommend both B650 and X670 motherboards. Let's talk about motherboard BIOS and BIOS flashback. Now, in order to boot your system for the very first time, we call this the first system post. Your motherboard needs to be using a BIOS that's compatible with your CPU. BIOS flashback, Gigabyte calls this QFlash Plus. It allows you to update the motherboard BIOS without a compatible CPU installed, which is very useful. For Ryzen 5000 CPUs, most motherboards are now shipping with a BIOS that will work with virtually any of those CPUs, so it probably is not necessary. For Ryzen 7000 motherboards, everyone that I'm aware of has BIOS flashback, so you're good there. Just note that while they'll at least post with any of the original X CPUs, you might need to do a BIOS flashback with any of the non-X 7000 series Ryzen CPUs, like the 7700 non-X for instance, and of course the newer X3D Ryzen 7000 CPUs. We cover this step by step in our How to Build a PC 2023 video, so I'll leave a link to it down in the video description. Let's talk about motherboard size. There are three mainstream motherboard sizes, what we call form factors. The full-size ATX form factor, a 2/3 side called a micro ATX or MATX for short, and a miniature-sized motherboard with only one PCIe slot called an ITX motherboard intended for very small form factor builds. Now, most of you will likely want either a full-size ATX or a micro ATX motherboard, but we'll also go through some ITX boards in our recommendations. Note that ITX boards tend to be much more expensive. Also, the PC case you buy needs to fit the motherboard, and while small motherboards will fit into larger cases, ATX motherboards will not fit into cases designed exclusively for smaller motherboards. So check your size compatibility before you buy a case. So what motherboard features should you be looking for? Well, in the past, we'd lead off with a discussion of the motherboard VRM, which is the little half square right here that delivers power to the CPU. And in previous generations of motherboards, it could overheat under heavy load. The great news is that any of the B450, B550, or B650 motherboards with a VRM heatsink, that's this piece of metal on top of the VRM to dissipate the heat, they will absolutely be fine for the CPUs that we recommend for it. And in particular, both B550 and B650 motherboards generally have very good VRMs to the point that you really don't need to worry about it, except on a handful of boards like the Asus Prime B550M-A and B650M-A motherboards, which we do not recommend. Next up is storage connections, starting with M.2 connectors. Motherboards range from one M.2 drive connector up to 5 and possibly even more on the board itself. Remember, you can also buy an add-in card to add additional M.2 connections. There are two primary types of M.2 connectors. One's intended for storage devices and one's intended for M.2 Wi-Fi adapters. Now, these M.2 connectors can run at different maximum speeds, from PCIe Gen 3 to Gen 4 to the newest and totally ludicrous Gen 5. Many motherboards now come with built-in heat sinks for M.2 drives, so consider that before you buy an SSD with a pre-installed heat shield. In addition, motherboards come with at least 4 SATA drive connections, though sometimes if you utilize more than one M.2 or some of the additional PCIe slots beyond the GPU one, then it might disable some of the SATA ports. If it does matter to you, consult the specs on the motherboard. Next up is motherboard audio. Now, the audio section of the motherboard is in the bottom left-hand corner of the board, and it's made up of capacitors and a Realtek audio codec chip. You use this audio anytime that you plug in an analog device with a connector that looks like this, either into the rear panel audio connectors or the ones on the front panel of your PC case. If instead you're plugging in a digital device with a connector like HDMI or USB, then you are bypassing the onboard motherboard audio processing, and you're instead using the secondary device for digital to analog conversion. Budget audio codecs can sound fine, and they're typically in the 800 series, such as the ALC 897. More premium audio codecs have better overall signal-to-noise ratios and additional audio signal boost for the front panel headphones, like the ALC 1200. The best audio codecs are the ALC 1220 or new but similar ALC 4080. both of which offer additional encoding and decoding support, as well as support for high impedance headphones when using the front panel PC audio plugs. Let's talk USB connections, starting with the rear panel. Now these can come in a couple different speeds and types. Most boards, they offer a range of USB-A connections ranging in speed from USB 2.0, those are usually the black USB connections, to the USB 3.2 Gen 1, typically colored blue, to USB 3.2 Gen 2 connections, often colored red. There are also USB Type-C connectors, which are smaller but faster ones. Motherboards also have headers to plug in the front PC case USB connections, both USB 3.2 and the slower 2.0 ports. And some come with USB Type-C headers, particularly the newer 600 series motherboards. In addition to USB connections, your motherboard will come with wired Ethernet. The older boards are generally 1 gigabit per second connections, while the newer 600 series boards come with at least 2.5 gigabit speed. Wi-Fi can also be built in, and if it is, it will also include Bluetooth connectivity, though you can buy an adapter either as a USB Wi-Fi adapter or a PCIe Wi-Fi add-in card to add this in. Let's jump into product recommendations, which are all linked down in the video description and which you can use to check out pricing and availability in your region. We'll keep this list updated, including if new motherboards launch or if a board gets discontinued, which does happen from time to time. Let's jump into Ryzen 5000 series motherboards. So primarily we're looking at the 5600, the 5600X, and the Ryzen 5500 here, although we could do the 5700X and the 5800X 3D, of course, given how their pricing continues to go. When we're building a gaming system at the kind of low to mid-range portion of the market, we primarily want to focus on getting the biggest, fastest graphics card we can, and then just getting a CPU that won't bottleneck it. And that's why we're going with these CPUs. They're really price efficient, so we don't want to then overspend on the motherboard, right? We want to make sure we're continuing to invest in our graphics card. So we've got some great value options here. Let's start off with the Ryzen 5500. That's a different architecture than the 5600. It only uses PCIe Gen 3 speeds, so you can put it on B550 motherboard, but if you can find a super cheap B450 motherboard like the Asus Prime B450M-A2, this one actually has BIOS flashback on it too. Great motherboard. I've been recommending it for a while for the Ryzen 5500. Really, it's got kind of ho-hum overall features. It does have 6 high-speed USB ports. It's got a weaker VRM, but you could probably upgrade that to a 5800X 3D in the future. Again, nothing to write home about except it's only $79. So for the 5500, I would look at one of these first. Let's jump over to B550 motherboards, which are more appropriate for like the Ryzen 5600, 5600X, so on and so forth, because they have PCIe Gen 4 at the top GPU slot and the top M.2 slot. And my favorite price to performance B550 motherboard is the ASRock B550M Pro 4. Right now selling for $106, can often be found for as little as $90 up to about $115 depending on when you find it. The reason I think this is the best price to performance is because it has upgraded audio at the budget level of motherboards, where everything else I'm going to show you is going to be entry level audio. This has ALC 1200 audio on it. It's got 5 audio capacitors on it. You just can't find that in this price class. That's why it's so great. It has a couple of M.2, included a M.2 heat shield on it, which is kind of a nice little added bonus to it. Has a bevy of rear panel USB connections, including a Type-C, 6 high-speed overall, and 2 Type-A there for like your keyboard, your mice, and everything. I really love this motherboard. The only thing it doesn't have is front panel USB Type-C, but honestly, at the budget level, you're probably not going to buy a case that has a front panel USB Type-C. This is the motherboard that I really love. Doesn't have the BIOS flashback on it, so I haven't recommended it as often, but now I feel pretty comfortable recommending for anything. This is the first motherboard I would see if I could get. Let's move over to a couple alternative boards in the budget category, B550s. That's like the $90 up to about $120 category. They do not have upgraded audio on them. They do have a similar feature set. Some of them also have BIOS flashback, which is just kind of a nice to have that peace of mind when you're buying the board, that if you get one with an old BIOS for some reason, you can always flash it to the updated one and post your system. The first one we want to start with here, Gigabyte B550M DS3H. $89. There's also a version of this with Wi-Fi on it. It's called the AC version, usually sells $10-15 more. Sometimes it's actually cheaper, which is a little crazy. In terms of rear panel connectivity, not the best, but certainly adequate for high-speed USB ports, for lower speed USB ports, the 2.0 ports. Again, no front panel USB Type-C to it, no heat shield on the M.2. You don't really need it, but in terms of aesthetics, it is what it is. The VRM is very, very sturdy on this one. You could run up to like a 5800X 3D very easily. And then we got like the MSI Pro B550M-VC. There's also the older -VDH version. The difference is the VC has the faster Wi-Fi on it. This board includes Wi-Fi in it, so that's kind of a nice to have. That's usually about a $20 to $30 feature or so. Also has a front panel USB Type-C header. The looks on this board aren't the greatest for sure, but it's got decent amount of rear panel connectivity to it. The VRMs are pretty good on it. $119, not bad for a Wi-Fi enabled motherboard at the budget class. Let's quickly jump into some other more premium motherboards. If you don't want to break the bank, I would not spend more than about $160, $170 total. And there's a number of good choices here. ASRock B550M Steel Legend. This is basically the Pro 4 board with RGB, an additional heatsink on the top VRM, kind of more heatsink overall, just super nice, a little bit more rear panel connectivity, $129, often can find it even cheaper. If you're an ASUS fan, I'd probably skip the ROG Strix boards unless they go on super sale. They're usually way too expensive for what you're getting. I like the ASUS Tough Gaming, either the B550M, the micro ATX version, or the standard ATX. Really not any difference between the boards except essentially the size on it. They either come with Wi-Fi or without. You can decide to buy that if you want. VRMs are great on them. The only thing I don't like about these boards is, of course, it does not have the front panel USB Type-C on it. Seems a little oversight for a board on this price class, but it does have BIOS flashback, which is really nice. You usually find these anywhere from $140 for the micro ATX ones up to about $160-ish for the ATX size ones. Finally, I got two ATX motherboards I really do like and have used. Gigabyte B550 Aorus Elite AXV2. We actually did our Ryzen 5800X 3D build on this board. Really liked it. It's got ALC 1200 audio on it. It's just super great VRMs on this board. You can really put any CPU you want on it. Got the front panel USB Type-C, a bevy of rear panel connectivity, $159. Love to see it come down a little bit, but that's not a bad price. And then finally from MSI, if you're an MSI person, go for the Tomahawk. There's a couple different versions of this board. There used to be the Gaming Edge Wi-Fi, which is basically the Tomahawk Wi-Fi, but they have come out with another version called the B550 Tomahawk Wi-Fi Max. Huge mouthful, thanks MSI. It's just an updated version of this board with Wi-Fi on it. Good rear panel connectivity, though not great. The Gigabyte board is quite a bit better. I do like it's got BIOS flashback on it, upgraded ALC 1200 audio on it. Overall, very nice motherboard for $169. Let's jump into the best motherboard for Ryzen 7000. Now here's the thing, the market for these motherboards has changed dramatically since Ryzen 7000 was introduced. Prices have come way down and a number of brand new motherboards, especially at the cheaper level, have been introduced in order to alleviate some of that price challenge. I expect that will continue to happen. So this is really about getting you the class of motherboard that you're looking for and giving you a couple of options. Check those links down in the video description, of course, for current pricing and availability. Starting off with the best budget motherboard for Ryzen 7000, and there's too many to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you the highlights here. You're looking to spend $125 up to $160. Gigabyte and ASRock, at least right now in the market, absolutely rule the roost. Unfortunately, the ASUS Prime boards are largely yuck. I would not get them. And then MSI is just overcharging for a number of its motherboards. I would look at the ASRock B650M Pro RS Wi-Fi. $150, you get Wi-Fi on it. There's a non-Wi-Fi version for like $10 less. Now these motherboards are all of them are going to have entry-level audio, entry-level features. They're not going to have phenomenal rear panel USB connectivity, but it's decent. It's 4 high-speed ports, including a Type-C, 4 lower speed 2.0 ports for your mice, your keyboards. All of the boards, remember, have BIOS flashback, so you get that as well. And I like this board because it's got 3 M.2 slots, 3 M.2s. Most people do not need that, but if you are somebody out there like a video editor where you want 3 drives to do in your video editing process, this is definitely one to check out. $150, the VRMs are super solid, as are most of the boards out there, with a front panel USB Type-C header. 2 thumbs up. Another board to take a look at, though, I don't like the $150 price right now, had been selling for cheaper, is the Gigabyte B650M DS3H. Very similar to the board that we just looked at, except it only has 2 M.2 slots. I say only 2. Most users don't get beyond 1 anyway, so 2 is probably more than you need. Otherwise, it's really kind of the exact same motherboard for about the same price, just lacks the Wi-Fi. That's why I'd like to see it a little bit cheaper. Let's jump more into the premium zone of motherboards. The good news is that these motherboards overall as a class have largely decreased in price from about like $240, $250 down to more to the $200 price point. And look at that, even lower right now. I was kind of shocked to see this price. This board typically sells for $199. They'll have upgraded audio on them, either ALC 1200, 1220, or 4080 audio codecs, as well as a lot more USB ports. Let's jump through. Let's start with this board, the MSI Mag B650M Mortar Wi-Fi. Phenomenal motherboard right now at $179. I would snap this thing up, snap it up. But even at $199, this is a great motherboard. Wi-Fi on it. It comes with a lot of rear panel USB connectivity. Those red ports are the highest speed. It comes with the Type-C. And then you get 4 of the USB 3.2s as well. That's really, really good. Got 2 M.2s on this one with heat shields. Got your front panel USB Type-C, great VRMs. The board looks phenomenal. Honestly, for $179, this is really hard to beat. The Tomahawk B650 is basically like the ATX size version of the Mortar, except for one important thing is it has an additional M.2 slot on it. So you get 3 M.2s instead of just the 2. Comes with a Wi-Fi. The rear panel looks identical. Comes with a built-in I/O shield, as does the Mortar on it. BIOS flashback on these boards, great VRMs. You're going to pay a little bit more for that extra M.2 though, up to $209. Still good price. On the Gigabyte side, very similar feature set for the B650 Aorus Pro AX. Only the ATX size version. The Micro ATX Pro actually has cut down features. I don't necessarily recommend it unless it comes way down in price. More of a budget, kind of slightly higher than budget tier motherboard. But the nice thing is ALC 1220 audio on this board here. It's got insane VRMs, really insane VRMs. These are great motherboards, has tons of rear panel USB connectivity. In addition to the ones we just saw on the Tomahawk and the Mortar, you get an additional 4 USB 2.0 ports on this. Right now selling for $229, not a bad price for this board. Sometimes this board can go up to $250. Definitely a little bit more pricey. Would love to see it come down a little bit. If you're someone who has to have an ASUS motherboard, the ASUS TUF Gaming is a good one to look at. B650 Plus. There's both a micro ATX version as well as an ATX version. Only about a $10 difference between the two. Now these have ALC 1200 audio, not 1220 or 4080, which are the two higher ones, but still very, very good. Nice upgraded audio. It's got the Wi-Fi on it. In terms of rear panel connectivity, a little bit different here in that you've got 2 USB Type-Cs on it, which is nice, but then you've only got 2 other high-speed ports on it and 4 2.0 ports as well. Just a little bit different configuration, maybe not as generous as some of the other board manufacturers, but still pretty good. You got the 3 M.2s under heat sinks. Overall, the VRMs are phenomenal. Has a really unique kind of, I like that blocky styling. I really do like that for the TUF motherboard. I think it does give it kind of a unique identity out there. 220 right now, 218. This board has been seen down to like 195 as well. Often it's the cheapest of the premium motherboards. The other motherboard I wanted to talk about here is the MSI MPG B650 Edge Wi-Fi. Really not that different than the Tomahawk. Maybe a little bit here and there. But the thing I think that most people will be looking at here is the RGB and the white kind of metallic stylings. Great for an all-white build. We will do like an all-white motherboard in just a moment. But if you're looking for a board that's kind of got that white styling to it, looks really cool. The other thing about this motherboard that I have not been able to figure out is it goes on sale more than any other motherboard I've seen. I don't quite understand that. Right now it's at $239, but you can often find this board all the way down to like $210. All right, for those of you who are looking for a color theme build, particularly those of you who want a white build, we'll do all black as well. I do really like the MSI MPG B650 Edge Wi-Fi. We already talked about this one. It's a little bit more silver than white on it. It has some cool RGB elements to it. I think overall would go really, really well with that kind of build. $239, it's got upgraded kind of everything across the board, including really nice rear panel connectivity. We also have the Gigabyte B650 Aero G. Now this is a board they market more towards creators, but it's basically the B650 Pro AX, except it's got the Aero styling to it. Really no difference whatsoever. Same amount of everything, just kind of has that more white, silvery, and slight kind of rainbow pastel picture to it. I think this would also really go well with a white theme build. But of course, if you are a purist and you absolutely have to have white on white on white, as always, we've got the NZXT N7 B650E. This board is basically an ASRock design, the motherboard itself, and then NZXT does all the styling to it. So it's got upgraded AL1220 audio to it. It's got decent rear panel connectivity, not as much high-speed connectivity as those other motherboards we were just looking at, but certainly plenty if you're just looking to do fun things like an all-white build. It does come with that clear CMOS button on the back, which I do really like, as well as the Wi-Fi. $316 right now. Wish it were a little bit cheaper, but that's been where it's been running. And of course, if you're looking to do like a total blackout theme, the NZXT N7 B650 also comes in all matte black. Really super sharp motherboard. Again, $316. Let's quickly go through the best creator boards. So we're looking at boards that have 4 M.2 slots on them, lots and lots of storage, and they've got upgraded audio along with a bevy of high-speed rear USB connectivity for all your creator goodness. You'll see some X670 boards in here like I promised. Let's start off with the board that last year I called the best kind of mid-range X670 board. That is the ASRock X670E Steel Legend. Unfortunately, it's gone up in price by 30 bucks. I don't know what happened there. Should come down. And as a result, it has a lot of price competition, but let me show you. It does have upgraded ALC 1220 audio. I will say only 3 audio capacitors, not necessarily the end of the world. It doesn't even necessarily mean that much. 4 M.2 slots on it. It does have pretty good rear panel connectivity. It's got your Wi-Fi on there. Then you've got relatively high speed, but not the highest speed USB connectivity and a Type-C. Right now selling for $299. But in stiff competition to it is a board I probably would pull the trigger on over that right now. The Asus TUF Gaming X670E plus Wi-Fi. This has 4 M.2 slots, a lot of M.2 slots on it. It's got phenomenal VRMs. It's got ALC 1220 upgraded audio. It's got the proprietary Asus version of the ALC 1220 audio codec on it. Great looking audio section. Look at all those capacitors down there. Has good rear panel USB connectivity, including 2 Type-Cs on it. 2 Type-Cs and tons of higher speed Type-A. I really like this board. If it continues to sell right around this $300 price point, I think this is a real winner. Another great one to take a look at, just compare prices on MSI, MPG, B650 Carbon Wi-Fi, 4 M.2s on the Carbon Wi-Fi. I like this board quite a bit. I think it also looks really nice. Has upgraded audio, good looking audio section to it. And in terms of its rear panel connectivity, probably offers you the slightly higher speed. You can figure out which one's slightly more than the other one, which one's going to suit your needs. But 1 Type-C on this, a lot of 3.2 Gen 2 connectivity as well. $309, but I have seen this motherboard get down to like $279 at times. Let's talk about the best ITX motherboard for Ryzen 7000. If we're just looking at the B650i motherboards, there's one by Gigabyte, there's one by Asus, there's one by ASRock, and there's one by MSI. You can go ahead and take your pick. All of them are relatively good boards. I will say the Asus board is priced kind of stupidly high. It's a ROG Strix board. I get it. They always charge more for that. But $325, that's pretty steep to me. It's pretty steep. Looks nice. It's got probably the best rear panel connectivity of any of them. And it includes an additional USB Type-C. So it's got 2 total USB Type-C, where the other ones have 1. Other than that, they're all essentially the same. They got great upgraded audio. Here's the ASRock one for $289. But the reason I think I'd recommend you the Gigabyte is it has 3 M.2 slots. If you're like, hey, Jason, I don't need 3 M.2 slots, then just go ahead and pick your favorite one based on maybe just looks alone, because honestly, that's what's going to divide it. Otherwise, I would probably go with the Gigabyte board for $259, or if I needed all that USB connectivity, I might pony it up for the Asus board. Remember, check out everything linked down in the video description for current pricing and availability, as well as the best current deals. If you got value out of the video, please give it a like, as it makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe, click that bell icon. That way you get notified when we release cool content. And we'll catch you on the next one.